then you can start. It won't be long, but I can't skip over who you are and say good words about you. That would not be polite as a host, and it would not be it would be unfair because everything is deserved. OK, donc, bienvenue à tous, à toutes et à tous. Merci d'avoir répondu à notre invitation. C'est avec grand plaisir que nous recevons aujourd'hui la Dr Rena N pour une conférence dans notre série Dialogue sur la recherche de la Faculté de médecine dentaire. Un grand merci particulier à notre conférencière, la Dr Rena N, d'avoir réussi à trouver du temps dans son horaire chargé pour nous parler ce midi. Dr. De Souza est directrice du prestigieux National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research au National Institute of Health. Cet institut finance de la recherche fondamentale, translationnelle, sociale, comportementale et clinique. Thank you, Dr. De Souza, for having accepted our invitation to give a presentation at our faculty seminar series. It is a great pleasure and honor to have you with us virtually. Okay, your presence today says a lot about your esteem for our faculty. Okay, and the subject you will cover is of utmost importance to us and also the broad scientific community. Your talk is particularly timely as the month of April is the National Month of Oral Health in Canada, and as the Canadian government, hopefully, is expected to announce funding for access to oral health program. So we'll cross our fingers and hear what the government will tell us later today.
Yes.
We would have hoped, obviously, to have Dr. De Souza here in person, but the COVID virus had yet other plans, and we may see some more of these along the road. We thank Dr. De Souza for offering to visit us at an ulterior date, and we will, of course, be pleased to host you under more relaxed conditions eventually, okay, when things are quieter and perhaps when the weather is nicer as well. Let me give you a few highlights of her prolific and spectacular career achievements. Prior to becoming NIDCR director, Dr. De Souza served at the University of Utah as Assistant Vice President for Academic Affairs and Education for the Health Sciences. She held the Ole and Marty Jensen Endowed Chair at the School of Dentistry that she led as an inaugural dean. She was president of the American Association of Dental Research and of the International Association of Dental Research, the two most biggest organizations related to oral health in the world. Dr. De Souza is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and also of the AADR. Over the past 30 years, Dr. De Souza has authored over 150 publications and book chapters in the areas of craniofacial development, matrix biology, and tissue regeneration. She received the 2010 Presidential Award for the Research Excellence from the Texas A&M Health Science Center and was inducted in the German National Academy of Sciences in 2012. She also received the IDR Distinguished Science Award in Pulp Biology Research in 2002 and the Erwin D. Mandel Distinguished National Mentor Award in 2017. Dr. De Souza maintains an active research laboratory. Rena, I don't know how you do that. It's wonderful that you can still do all this in the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at the NIH. Today, her talk will be about the emerging science and promising technology to advance oral health. There will be a possibility at the end to ask questions. So please, everybody, close your microphones, but I think that Rima will handle this as well. Dr. De Souza, the platform is all yours.
Thank you, Antonio. Obviously, I cherish the friendship that we've had and shared over so many years. Days when I came up to Montreal to learn from you, the expert on transmission electron microscopy. You taught me everything I know. So, so now you're responsible. No, but I really do appreciate and value your leadership there at the University of Montreal. I wish I could speak French. I understood enough to know that you were saying somewhat good things about me, and I appreciate that. but what I really am and who I really aspire to be is to be a good communicator and to make sure that I take on the responsibility of directing really the world's largest institute dedicated to dental, oral, and craniofacial research, that the importance of this position means that I communicate to you all the excitement of the era we live in, which truly is a golden era of opportunity. Now, as clearly represented on that Time magazine cover, we will never be the same, right? And our lives have changed, the world has changed. We've looked at what we were doing pre-pandemic and questioned everything about what we did and how we communicated. And this is one example of a platform that is quite effective, and we should continue engaging on this level. That we realize human connections, though, are important, makes me really wish I was there in person, because that would have allowed me to talk to students and to trainees of different levels and to faculty who aspire to really become and answer the questions they seek to answer. We've learned through the pandemic that it doesn't pay to be rigid in our thinking, that being flexible and nimble and being able to adapt to crises rapidly is here to stay. It's actually going to be, I think, a guiding force in us looking at what we're doing as scientists and questioning the value of what we're doing in terms of patients and public health needs. We've learned that high-risk approaches actually do pay off. In the past, we would shy away from them, right? And I'm hoping that the funding agencies in Canada take that seriously. We have unearthed some deficiencies in our system. There were many things in the US that we just simply didn't have. The infrastructure for science communication, for education about vaccines was clearly lacking, but now we are well prepared for the future because of the lessons we learned. We've learned that health inequities and social determinants drive our health status, not just in the US and in Canada, but around the world. And you can tell that just from the COVID data that is emerging. We've learned that there is an advantage to take care, to leverage from technologies such as telehealth and teledentistry, because they do provide a way in which we can communicate to patients, some basics, right? That science and technology and leadership matters. I don't have to say enough about that. You know that in your institution, you know it politically and worldwide, that is important. At NIH, I was very sad to say goodbye to Francis Collins. He was, in fact, a leader like no other, really dynamic and left a huge legacy in addition to all his gene discoveries, identifying the human genome that just drew completion last week. But he did so much else to move the Institute into the future. And, as I leave the PowerPoint with you, I hope you can click on that YouTube link and actually watch the farewell video messaging that came from all his big friends. They're all stars, as well as us institute directors paying tribute to this great man. I was very privileged to be sworn in and have him as boss, but equally impressive is the fact that we have a dentist scientist, Dr. Tabak, Larry Tabak, who is risen now to be the acting director of NIH, and he will steer the institute even through these difficult times, keeping it stable and steady. So we're very, very proud of this achievement and for the profession and that Dr. Tabak brings to all of us. I'm very pleased that I was able to recruit in the first year 2 outstanding leaders, Jennifer Webster-Syriac, my right-hand deputy director, who comes from North Carolina as a clinician, a scientist, a mentor, an educator. She has it all. Very important to have her on my side as we move the Institute into a very diverse era of hiring, that she will focus on neurosciences and pain, that portfolio, and on building the infrastructure for clinical research and capacity building, which is, I think, what is really needed for our field today. And then, of course, Renee Jaskal, who comes with a lot of federal government expertise, who will help us form new collaborations across the board. For those of you that have or thinking of writing training grants, and you can do that from Canada. Lynn King is now heading that division of extramural activities. She took over from Alicia Dombrowski, who, and so will be in charge of council and our board of scientific affairs. But Leslie Frieden is currently in charge of the training and career development branch. So she stepped up to be acting chief. Belinda Hauser actually will make available to all your trainees the possibility of coming to NIH for a summer research fellowship experience, or for a longer period of time, a year for faculty who want to learn new technologies and who want to collaborate with any of our investigators on campus. So all these three wonderful, talented women are available for you to contact. So what I want to do today is just kind of very briefly scan over where COVID-19 research is today for NIH. I'll give you an update from Tony Fauci from this morning, as late as this morning, to draw to your attention where we are in terms of our present time and how NIH is leveraging from science and technology advances so we can improve health for everybody. Give you a little bit about the budget. It was recently approved, and the milestone achievements of the Institute in the last year, and more specifics on all the grant mechanisms and opportunities that are available to all of you. So NIH, as you know, is a huge operational $44 billion institute that is funded through the federal government. And we have 27 institutes and centers. So all the blue dots are institutes, and NIDCR is there, as you can see. NIH is noted for funding across the world, across the US and across the world, and has many scientists that are present on campus. What makes NIDCR very special is that we will celebrate our 75th anniversary next year, so our Diamond Jubilee. And I just want to say that we were created in 1948 because of a public health need. Now, we're not a public health institution. We are focused on research, but the evidence that research will provide should guide our policy reforms, our educational systems, and how we really essentially treat patients. And so we were created because Harry Truman felt that we had a national crisis. There were young men going to war that couldn't make it because they had a mouth full of dental caries. So at this time, fluoride was being introduced into the community water fluoridation, into the community water supply. And so he, along with H. Trendley Dean, who was our first director, created this institute, as called NIDR at that time. And we've stayed true to this mission, that we will work our very best to move scientific discoveries into innovations that actually affect oral, dental, and craniofacial health. The way we divide it is we have an extramural branch, which really gets the majority of the funding that goes out to institutions. And yes, we do fund Canadian schools. I think there were grants given to the University of Toronto and perhaps British Columbia and a few others. So that is absolutely in our charge to do. What becomes a little tricky is to make sure that the collaborations are in fact US based, because it is taxpayers' money, and there is that sensitivity about using national resources for outside the US projects. But I know Tony and others have participated in these grants across over the years. I mean, the portfolio is divided, as you can see, in really broadly into disease areas. We cover the spectrum of diseases, cross-cutting approaches that go from foundational sciences to practicing in communities. And you can see on the far right that there is always a need to pay attention to where the emergent fronts are. So we're going to be heavily investing in behavioral and social sciences, implementation sciences, and data science, because that in fact is going to dictate the kind of research we do and how we gather together across large data sets, meaningful data now that is going to be completely open access to all, open to all in the public domain. We are fortunate to have Building 30. So we have a group of intramural researchers, 27 of them principal investigators that work in each of these areas. And I want you to note that because Matt Hoffman runs this very efficiently, and the PIs are cutting edge, top-notch scientists who mentor and are willing to train individuals from other institutions. So you can come for a short-term experience or a longer-term postdoc or faculty scholarship program. Just a few weeks ago, we got the news that we had crossed the $500 million mark for our total budget, which gives us, I think, the opportunity now with the $16 million increase to fund the new initiatives that you will learn about in a few minutes. How do we divide this money? Well, the majority of it, as I said before, goes outside to institutions. 78% plus actually goes to schools and universities. And we divide the rest of it into various components, the business initiatives, training and career development, and the largest centers. And the hope is to increase the training and career development investment so that we are take on very seriously the responsibility for training the future generation of investigators, very important, and prepare them for the new waves of science and technology. Our funding rate is higher than the average NIH, so we are at 25% of our proposals, and we do have selectivity that weighs in when we look at the area of research being proposed, if it's in an underrepresented area, or if it comes from women who, and to create a better balance between gender-based populations as well as those who are underrepresented in our country and in our biomedical workforce. And now, I don't like to show this slide, but it is in fact a fact that most of our funding goes outside dental schools. And the reason for that is that the best science was what is the center of NIDCR's mission. Now, though, I think over the next 4 or 5 years, you're going to see more going to dental schools because we see that as our key stakeholder. And obviously the clinician, the faculty member who is in the clinic, or the student and the trainee is chairside with the patient. And that's where a lot of the knowledge frontiers are going to move forward on translational research. So in order to make that happen, this new wave of opportunity for NIDCR, we need to fund more dental schools than in the past. So you'll see that that will happen. So we are invested in the University of Montreal. I'm hoping that after this talk, there'll be far more interest in collaborating with researchers in the US and also looking at the mechanisms that we offer to take them back to your institutes, your institutions as well as ideas for the future. Now, with the COVID progress that was made, there's a lot of new data coming out on variants. What NIH is doing now is to make sure that we're prepared for the rest of the pandemic as it continues, to be sure that we have a platform technology that can very quickly evaluate the pathogenicity and infectivity of new variants. So we have a rapid test to see whether a variant is going to cause harm or just be infective but not cause as much harm. And the latest one of Omicron seems to be in that category, being highly infective but not likely to put people in hospitals. We're looking at various therapeutics, drugs that can be used singly or in combination with each other to create the best therapeutic approach to mitigate the damage caused by the disease. And you know that Delta and some Omicron cases have been quite devastating. There is an association with pregnancy. We're looking at all of that and childhood spread as well. You can see that that's what's developing for the future is the preparedness plan that will include these 5 pillars. And this is approved by Congress so that we can actually look at where the infrastructure was lacking in terms of clinical trial capacity and effectiveness and all these other factors and actually be well prepared for the future. So that's always one of the blessings of a crisis of this nature. As you must know, there are symptoms of long haulers, of people who've had COVID that linger for many, many months. We don't know years as yet, but I'm sure it will linger, especially respiratory symptoms. And of course, there's oral cavity symptoms of tongue ulcers, loss of taste, dry mouth. And so we're funding a huge consortium that is based at NYU it's a hub and spoke model. So hub is based at NYU with many other areas around the country that are registering patients and logging in symptoms and following them up. And we have now a proposal from NIDCR to include a protocol for children. We have one for adults that log in all the long-term effects of COVID in children. And so that will hopefully be funded soon. Now, we also kind of had to be very nimble and quick. And one of our researchers, who is Blake Warner, and one of our own PIs, stood in the car line and was able to get samples from asymptomatic COVID patients early on in the crisis. He used animal studies as well, single cell RNA, and showed that in fact, the virus SARS-CoV-2 had the ability to bind to oral mucosal cells. And of course, in salivary glands proliferated quite well to where salivary diagnostics became possible. So we were responsible for one of these major studies that, a hallmark study that involved many other investigators outside NIDCR. We also funded very clinically based studies, as you can see from the PBRN on the right, to very, very basic science studies, including technology advances with strips and with masks that turn a certain color when exposed to the virus. And I think this is going to continue. But what I find most encouraging is that the technologies that put this patient in the center are here to stay and can be used by us for other issues that we have dealt with over the years. Patient apps, video gaming, all of that now is possible to implement for oral health problems that we have struggled with for years. Now, one of the major what we recognized was a big failing in the US, because we don't, like Canada or the UK, have a national health system, right? We didn't have an infrastructure in place where relationship building was already set between academic partners, community, religious-based organizations, pharmacies, etc. So there's a new network being created called CEAL, C-E-A-L, that has this, as you can see in red, and as infrastructure. And obviously now, I look at it and say, wow, this is great, but can we at NIDCR avail of this infrastructure that the pandemic made possible? So that is going to be something we look at. Now, when I took on the office virtually, I'm still a virtual director, there was something going on that was of tremendous significance. It was the report on the oral health status of Americans. And that report was commissioned by the then Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, who worked under President Trump's administration. Now, a group was in place, 400 plus contributors in place when COVID hit. The presidential election happened, the cabinet changed, and hence we had a new Surgeon General. And NIDCR had to step in to take over the report and to guide it to completion through edits. And I'll tell you why it's so important, because it really is a data-driven lifespan, but goes by age groups and all the diseases that still prevail in our country and likely in Canada as well. So what the report recognized was that as oral health professionals, whether you're a basic scientist or a clinician, that we really have biological systems, paradigms for biomineralization, which Tony has researched so well and others, taste, saliva. We have systems that are not really present in any other part of the body and serve as models or paradigms to study. But we also control the entryway into the body for common risk factors like bad nutrition, e-cigarettes, tobacco, alcohol. These are risk factors that predispose to dental diseases, but that are also causing cardiovascular disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cancers, etc. And that the oral cavity manifests systemic disease, and we can also use the oral cavity as a monitor for progress in systemic conditions, right? So we play this very important role, and we've had tremendous amount of science and technology driving all of this. But on the right, you see, unfortunately, the statistics that we still face. And this is not something that's US-based alone. It's a global threat. And the World Health Organization recognized it as such and asked for oral health to be considered as part of important for general health, and also that oral health care be considered part of universal health coverage. So this is where we are today. And so when we looked at the last 20 years, a report talks about the change in demographics, huge in the US. We've moved into a digital era, certainly for dental education and treatment, that's true. We're looking at delivery of services being done differently now, having more of a community base, looking at what we deliver is being questioned. Our disease trends have changed. We've had tremendous science advances, but we remain behind in oral health because we have divides and structural barriers and social determinants of health that prevent us from taking what we know and translating it into what we do. So what we know to what we do, there's a gap. And of course, the viral pandemic really kind of building its own set of challenges. And so NIDCR wishes to do all of this, is to try to come up with knowledge bases that will move our understanding of health and disease. And driving that would be our need to change reforms and policies, to reduce the impact of the upstream determinants of health, and to reconfigure the oral health care delivery workforce. All of these rely on data, on evidence, and that we reimagine dental education as being different today than what it would be 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, right? And that we train oral health professionals and researchers in a manner that would help reduce these disparities and inequities that exist. So we had 2 papers that bookended the report that were in the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, just short perspective kind of visionary commentaries. And there are 4 other papers that are targeted to each interest group that will be out in about a month that are derived from the report and connect the themes of the report across the lifespan. So please do watch out for that. And I think if you're a researcher and a public health dentist or a clinician, there's something there for each one of you. And I think what I got most impressed by as a clinician was that you can no longer look at a problem or a patient singly. You have to look at the context. Just like no longer can we do research in a reductionist way, right? We have to be thinking of the omics right now. And so when you treat a patient that for a cavity, for example, or decay, and that patient is a 14-year-old, has now beautiful filling or restoration in their mouths, they go home. Well, what is in the refrigerator? What are the family influences and what are the community influences that are going to keep this young 14-year-old away from all the environmental threats, including bad nutrition? We ought to be considering that, the holistic approach, which is also applied to science. In no other way is science an exception, that we now are looking at a broad array of technologies, all the omics, and including the behaviors and social sciences that come into play when we look at our scientific achievements. And that led us to our strategic plan, which was also one of my major responsibilities. And I thought it was a great way to unite the community that I was beginning to know virtually. And the strategic plan for NIDCR has 3 guiding lights, principles. We must translate, because if we were translating better, then our data today would not look like what it did 20 years ago when the first Surgeon General's report was released. There was hardly any change. There was progress on science, but not much for patients who suffer from caries and periodontal disease and cancers. That we have to produce a workforce that represents the demographics of our population is a key priority, and that we actually look at what we do, measure our successes, learn from our failures, and reinvent ourselves as we move to the future with these core values in place. And I just want to touch on what I mean by translation, because in the past, when it first came out, it was the basic scientists on one end and the clinicians on another end, and never the twain shall meet in our lifestyles and our attitudes. That's what we were thinking of as silos. And we were thinking of an in-between area called translational research. in a kind of a bi-directional way, a linear continuum. But now it's very critical that we understand translation as being a circular continuum that feeds on itself. Foundational, very important, because if you don't have foundational discoveries, you can't fuel the clinical arm or the public health arm. Just as important, what we learn from the community can be translated to the bench, right? So that is the measure by which we would gauge translation. The most important thing, though, is to keep the patient in the center and to be asking ourselves the question, is my research relevant to human health and disease? And that is guiding our thinking for the future. So the first goal is to put the meat on the bones of our claim, or the association between oral health and systemic diseases and vice versa. What are the cellular molecular determinants that are shared or unique to these systems? Alzheimer's, for example, now is associated with the decline in, obviously, cognitive decline, and Alzheimer's associated with edentulosum. And there's actually periodontal disease and an enzyme that is very specific to the periodontium, P. gingivalis. The enzyme is called gingipain, is also present in Alzheimer's, the brains of Alzheimer's patients, and biopsy samples. But we need to know more about the mechanistic aspects of that, as well as other connections. Then to take all of that and to say, listen, I'm treating Tony in the chair, and he has his own unique genetic profile, and his biochemical profiles are also unique. And I need to understand his what would be best for him at this time, the best treatment for the right reason at the right time, right? So that is the personalized approach. And then taking all of that knowledge and translating it chairside is where we need to develop even further. The implementation to community settings and to policy making is very important. The training remains a huge commitment for us. And for me personally, I've always thought that my role as a mentor was as important to me as making a new discovery. I felt equally uplifted when I saw a trainee succeed in a career path or research career, right? And I'm sure you share that with me. And then finally, our existing partnerships, and you are one of our very important stakeholders, is to make those connections and to look at ways to keep united so that we can move together in solving so many problems that exist today. Now, just to alert you, in addition to what we have in our portfolio, and we are in the we classified in the smaller institute category, but we have one of the bigger budgets amongst the small institutes. So, for example, Tony Fauci's budget is about 5 billion plus, or more than that, actually 6. So there's a big difference, right, in the budget. So we have to take advantage of trans NIH programs where we can have our name on it, put in our little bit of money, but leverage from the resources of these big institutes. And these are the initiatives that exist. There's Cancer Moonshot, where President Biden has a personal commitment to conquer this disease. It's a moving target, with a lot of money there and a lot of need for us in oral cancers to move forward. There's another initiative on pain and opioid or substance use disorders. And you can see through this that we go into brain imaging, which for me raises the question of why aren't we doing something more innovative for diagnosing pulpitis? Why? I mean, we have challenges because we have hard tissues that we have to the beam has to cut through, but is it possible for us to do soft tissue imaging for these unique structures? And we certainly are going to take advantage of that. And I want to just talk a little bit about HEAL. HEAL has a very significant budget, and they divided into 2 main arms: pain management. How do we alleviate pain? How do we handle acute to chronic transitions of pain? How do we understand the underlying mechanisms of pain? And then all of that is connected to our prescriptions, right? To what we prescribe for pain relief. There's a huge surge of research to come up with non-narcotic analgesics and also different kinds of behavioral management of pain in these areas. And also to be looking at individuals who don't have access to care and how they deal with pain. And I'll give you examples of what we're funding right now. So one grant opportunity for you to consider if you are if you're a neurobiologist or you have interest in nerve tracks, that we are looking at innovation and how neural elements exist in joints like the knee joint and the temporomandibular joint. And because obviously, if you follow neural pathways, you're going to get an entryway into the pathogenesis of disease, because blood vessels follow, and you can see that there are changes that occur even in the unique fibrocartilage disc of the temporomandibular joint. So we do have that currently in place. We also have are guided by this amazing initiative that Francis Collins actually put in place 7 years ago. And his goal was, I'm going to get people to come out of their silos, big pharma. I mean, you're talking CEOs of the big companies, Merck, and all of them at the table with government, with industry, smaller industry partners, and academia, and federal regulators, to look at these diseases. I mean, who would have thought, right? Could we possibly have made a dent? But we have tremendous progress in these diseases. In fact, the latest drug for Alzheimer's came from this initiative. It's controversial because it's expensive, but it did come from this particular approach. And classified in this were the autoimmune conditions, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. And they made such great progress that when I came on board, Francis asked if I would be willing to help lead the Sjogren's syndrome investigations as part of the autoimmune disorders condition. We are. So what is the whole philosophy behind that? It's the systems approach. You gather your patients, you do a natural history, create a universal thesaurus. So what you're calling mild is what I'm calling mild, and what is severe. So everyone has this kind of calibrated system. We look at the tissues as they are healthy, but we disperse them. So we understand individual cell behavior, interaction between cells and matrices, and then we put everything back together in situ in a disease setting. And that's how therapeutics were identified. And that's how in other words, they find out the molecular targets that have the potential to be therapies. And so we should expect to see a lot of progress in the area of Sjogren's in the next few years. We've also, through AMP, initiated an interesting technology where adenoviral associated gene therapies are templated. So there is a vector platform that is being developed, will be tested for safety and efficacy, and approved by the FDA. So it's ready to go. So if you come on board and say, I am interested in handling a melogenesis imperfecta, and I'm going to use this to put the right gene, could be a meloblastin or melogenin, into this vector and target it to the right tissue, you will be able to fast track your research to where it's therapeutically significant. And so that's the wave of what's happening right now. And all of you would know and recognize that data science is taking on a huge role right now for the way we connect the dots between our systems. Everything is going to be open access. All of these principles in place right now. You will have, if you're looking at a gene and you want to know what other diseases is it implicated in, you'll have the resources available at your fingertips. So for those of you that are not likely to be comfortable with data science, I urge you to just get oriented to it so that you will have the tools necessary to move your research into the future. Now, this is a very exciting initiative. So many years ago, the Defense Department in the US was charged to create new technologies, and they went about it in a very different way from the way we at NIH handle our research. We're very curiosity driven, right? Y'all are curiosity driven, I'm sure. This is use driven. It's asking you, what use does your research have for humanity? So with that guiding principle, they came up in a short period of time with the internet, with GPS, what we use now came from DARPA, self-driving cars, electric cars, mRNA vaccines were also created through that movement. And it's a different attitude towards science, where you have to be nimble and you take high risks, but things that don't work are thrown out early, things that do work and have the chances are kept going. And that is approved right now. And we're looking for more direction as to where it's going to, how it's actually going to be operationalized. My hope is that it will be based at NIH, and because we have the infrastructure. And but it also tells me that that is going to be the wave of the future for all of our science. And I'm sure the Canadian government is thinking on the same lines of how do we make our research, the return for investment of our research dollars make a difference for our citizens, right? So that's the same thing. Now, most of you are aware that NIDCR also funds its large grants. These are, a heavy investment of $75 million apiece. We have a practice-based research network where we engage our clinicians in the private sector to become scholars and to think like scholars when they treat their patients. So if you have a new material in the market, and I hope there's one that's going to replace amalgams soon, and you put it in you're using it in your practice because the salesperson gave you samples, and you notice 3 months later that the filling held up good, but then 6 months later, there was marginal leakage and the restoration is beginning to fail. What do you do with that knowledge? So this research network allows you to connect with 1,000 other clinicians in that area. Each one has 1,000 patients enrolled in and then suddenly you have a study where you can get meaningful data. So that's what our National Dental Practice-Based Research Network does. We also have another consortium based in California and in Michigan with Harvard and Pittsburgh that is looking at FDA-approved therapies for regeneration of oral craniofacial tissues. Currently, it's in its second cycle. It's got, I think, about 6 or 7 FDA eligible devices, therapies that are under consideration right now. And I wish for this group, as well as the National, the Practice-Based Research Network, to connect the dots in that systems approach. So how can we come up with a regenerative therapy for periodontal disease if we don't fully understand the pathogenesis of periodontal disease? We don't. So I want those dots to be connected such that these wonderful researchers can move forward for the future. Yang Chai at USC leads one of these regenerative consortiums, and he's also leading the face-based repository that is undoubtedly going to go into the big data science realm. Lots of genes and mutations and deep phenotyping information to inform clinicians and scientists. And then I'll tell you more about this exciting initiative on temporomandibular joint research. This is going to be housed in a manner such that we cover every aspect of the disease from early to late. Unfortunately, late demands surgical interventions, and the surgeries are not oftentimes successful. In fact, they're very rarely successful. And so there's a need to not recommend surgeries or to do things to prevent someone's online. So this is going to be in the same approach as AMP, where we look at patients' natural histories, biomarkers that can say, listen, if you're going to show a higher level of interleukin-9, that you will be definitely entering the acute phase of temporomandibular joint disease, and then as it progresses on. And it is a huge societal problem, and it's difficult to manage. So we have shortly, we'll be issuing the grant announcement to invite people from all over the spectrum to engage. If you have interest in the behavioral management of TMD, there is a place for you in this effort. And if you can identify collaborators, I know that there are many Canadians that are in the area of pain and neuroscience research that would help this initiative move forward. Now, sadly, despite the success of the vaccine, this is the vaccine against the human papillomavirus, the incidence is increasing amongst young males, almost to 5.3%, 5.3 times more prevalent in males than in females. And initially the vaccine was only meant for teenage girls, remember? So now it's moving And we're trying to understand why there is a rise despite the vaccine, which is very effective. It's because I think those upstream determinants, those environmental factors haven't ceased as much as they should have. And HPV positive oropharyngeal cancers, as you would expect, are hard to detect early because you have to look way back in the throat, right? But they're rising to be more common and more common than cervical cancers even. So there is a need for us now to bring people to the table to look at early biomarkers, early detection, early intervention in the most innovative way. And there's grants that we have already out there. Now, this is exciting because it was one of the most creative thoughts on the table, which is, could we create within the dental school the philosophy of a practice-based research network that I described as happening in the private sector? Could we engage our clinicians? And we certainly in dental schools have the most diverse cadre of patients. We see simple cases to very complex cases. And our specialty trainees are dealing with the more complex, right? And some of us actually have special needs clinics where we treat individuals with disabilities and who are compromised and who need special arrangements made. So we're going to create this grant mechanism to draw in faculty, clinical faculty. Of course, they'll collaborate with other research faculty and with students and with auxiliary staff to identify focus areas of research, to learn clinical research methodology so we can train the next generation of clinical scholars. So that's also on its way. I'm now going to go very quickly through the grant opportunities that are available, and you will have this PowerPoint, so don't be nervous about taking notes. You will have all of these links available. Janice Lee runs our Office of the Clinical Director. She's an oral surgeon scientist, but she also runs a clinical research fellowship where she trains DDSs, DDS PhDs to do clinical research. It's focused on rare, undiagnosed conditions. But you come in there and you're for 2 years immersed in NIH's amazing environment, intellectually rigorous, and you learn, you have your own research project. Sometimes it extends from 2 to 3 years, but it's generally meant to be a 2-year program. And the deadline for that is the 15th of September. So do make this available and this knowledge available to your trainees. We also now have restructured the dental public health residency program with 1 year of dental public health training. So these individuals have DDSs and MPHs, and they come to the program and get kind of board certified in dental public health. And then they do a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship. This way, I think NIDCR can begin moving the needle on creating a pipeline for of dental public health researchers, not just service-oriented individuals. They're important, but it's important to also have the researchers in place. So that's available, and we admit 2 a year for a start, hopefully to grow to 3 a year. Just to let you know, there are summer opportunities for trainees at college levels and within dental schools. We also have, from a very enormous initiative and push from NIH, to create a much more diverse workforce than we have currently. And I want to show you some data. This came about when George Floyd's incident, his murder, became on the national platform, great source of sadness for our communities. And NIH stepped up, and Francis made a public apology that NIH too was very responsible for structural racism in the way structural racism means that your policies and your programs don't make it possible for equality and equity. And I can give a whole talk on this area. And so we have all these groups now that are visible on our campus. We're changing the face of NIH. If you walked on campus, you're not just going to see white males alone, but you're going to see diversity, a palette of color, because that's who the NIH is. And if you looked at what we're doing right now in oral health, we just don't have the representation that we should have. If you looked at dentists as compared to US populations, we are short in every category except the Asian category. And so NIDCR had to take a special look at this. We looked at all our grants, every one of our different kinds of grants, and in all of them, we had a very, very low percentage. So that made us think that we need to do something different. And we are having a public-private partnership to engage ADA, ADEA, our educational components, and not just to admit people into dental schools and then draw from that pipeline an enriched biomedical research workforce that's diverse, but to also have representation at the highest levels of leadership. Now, Canada is way ahead of us in this respect, a true assimilation of, and as your Prime Minister had said, that diversity is your strength. You know, it's not so much the culture in the US. So we have, you know, unique set of challenges to overcome. But here are these opportunities that exist for individuals to come in with short-term projects, with funding their DDS PhD training. We're looking at diversity there. We have different programs. All of these are covered in our website, so do look at them. And we do fund individuals and trainees from Canada. You're especially eligible for the K Awards, because that's designated for all categories. And we have, as I will show later in the schematic, a grant for every stage of career development. What we've created also are we realized that the leaks in the pipeline were occurring when you come out of a PhD program and you enter a postdoc. It's hard. You suddenly have to be thinking on your own. You have mentors, but you're still going to develop your independent program. You're trying to negotiate with your PhD mentor. All of that makes for difficulties and hardships. And we have a grant to support that transition. And we have another grant to support the transition from a postdoctoral fellow status to that of an entering faculty member, because that's another, you're kind of thrown into the deep end, very often having to swim on your own. So we're looking at that from every angle, so to speak. Here are additional programs that NIDCR has leveraged from other institutes to create this diversity in our workforce. And I would like to learn more as to how Canada is diversifying its entry level and its leadership in dental, oral, and craniofacial research fields. I would really like to know more about that. We have career development awards. This means that you're already a faculty member and you may or may not have had a PhD training. You could have had a master's training, but you have the DDS, which qualifies you for a K award. And so you can get in if you took time off to care for your child, a newborn child, if you suffered through the pandemic. There are re-entry supplements that will help you get back into gear and get back on track, so to speak. And these are the various grant opportunities. I know I'm just spitting these out, but I want to make sure it was in my PowerPoint so that you could access this information later. So we have very targeted areas here, in this case, genomics, but we have opportunities really covering pain, neurosciences, and all the other aspects. When you graduate, though, from dental school in the US, you normally have a huge debt of tuition. We have a loan repayment program that gives you up to $50,000 now. It might go up to $75,000 a year that will be directed to paying back your loans and your debts. Because in some schools in the US, you graduate with debts that are close to $400,000 because the tuition is about $125,000 a year, especially in the Northeast private schools. Just so that you know, we have the Fogarty Center that encourages international research, training opportunities, where someone who's based in the US can go to Africa and to South America, and vice versa. Individuals come into US-based labs to work on global health issues. The Office of Research in Women's Health are dealing specifically with gender-based diseases. And for us, there are two that we're very committed to developing: Sjogren's has a 9-to-1 predisposition in women, and temporomandibular joint disorder is hormonally linked, and women are more prone to suffer from TMD than men. And you can see, I'm mentioning this again, that the R25 mechanism now is given to schools so that we can start developing pipelines at college levels and sometimes high school levels as well. I don't know if you have that in the Canadian system. We do have a wide portfolio to deal with health disparities research, understanding individuals, their family settings and community settings. It involves a lot of behavioral and social determinants of health kind of research. And again, I think even though we fund it, we haven't made enough progress to have made the report data more encouraging. Yes. So these are the opportunities that are currently available to you and to your colleagues in each of these areas. And they involve very population specific mechanisms to improve conditions for Native Americans, and you have indigenous populations, to look at vaccine hesitancy, so behavioral and communication, science communication kind of programs, and also finding ways in which we can measure in real time how AI and machine learning tools can actually be used to identify health disparities. Very important. So as for anyone here that has students or any students attending, you know that you have many options of career paths to choose. You can be based in academia, which for me is the best because you can actually have the privilege afforded to you to mentor the next generation. You can go into public health, you care for the community, science policy, communication. You can go into industry that has its specific pros, advocacy and government work. All of these await you as you, basically navigate this path through your training. And NIDCR offers, this is a summary slide of all that I just talked about. The pink boxes are what is available on site at NIH, and then the blue boxes are the grants that can support training at each of these levels. And you'll see by next year, we'll have a lot more in the high school college area because we're just beginning to leverage from these programs. Just so that you know, many of you are part of the Canadian Association of Dental Research, and the American Association, now changed its name to AADOCR, is funded by NIDCR in a very interesting program that is running its second year. 10 junior, early career investigators enroll each year. So now we have 20, and they are hooked up with mentors. They have a support group, a leadership training almost, but very dedicated to research mentorship. And they get help writing their first grant. And we've had tremendous success from this approach, and hoping to expand this venture. So I'm hoping you all would consider something similar as well in your institution. And then all these other concepts that I described earlier. So what you're going to find now are new directions. So when, say, I'll pick on Rima. Rima has a specific idea that she is excited about. And she looks through all your grants and realizes it's not well covered. There's no one really caring about this idea. For NIDCR, she can approach us and say, listen, this is my idea. This is what's known. This is where the gaps are. Would you consider funding this? Now, what I would do when I get an email like that, I send it to program staff. They go into it and research it thoroughly. And sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't, but most often they do agree. And that becomes a concept. So concept then is fleshed out, it's presented to council. Council is the advisory group to the director, and council approves or disapproves or makes changes. And once that concept is through council, then program staff can issue out grant opportunities. It could be an R01, which is the gold standard grant. It could be smaller R, or it could be a big U, which is a cooperative agreement that is clinically oriented. So that's what I want to encourage you for. And this is what led to these 4 announcements. It came from concepts from the community in these areas that I've already stressed. Now, recently we approved more. How do we use promotion-based technologies outside the dental setting? How do we develop a more I think, a more energized dentist scientist workforce that is clinically focused. All of these are important. More recently, in the last council, which was, it was in January, we issued out these three. I've talked about all three as being important opportunities coming up very shortly. And if you looked at all the challenges that we face, and I don't have to spit out this data again, they're very clear. You would have to recognize that the room for progress is huge, that we need to change the world and create the future we seek. We've got to feel that commitment, right? In whatever ecosystem you are in. And if we close our eyes and just thought, and this was what Tara said for ARPA-H, could we develop mRNA vaccines to prevent cancers now that we have it for viral attacks? Could we have an mRNA vaccine for caries that would look not at a specific bug, but looking at a downstream target, an acid-producing mechanism that would prevent dissolution of enamel? Why not, right? Why not? Could we target drugs? Could we have platform-based technologies and invent things that patients can use to control or have ownership of their own health conditions? So I would not go up to space, even if Jeff Bezos offered me a free ride. I think I'm too chicken for that. But what I can do occasionally is to just dream. I dream of a world where every child can lead a life that is really free of stigma and poverty. And that where we look at a patient as a whole, genetic, environmental, behavioral, all of that comes together in our thinking, that we also look at the risk factors that we are responsible for advising a patient about, and look at that in the context of systemic conditions so that we can create an overall a healthy individual. And since we're all getting there, eventually I think to have an aging population. Jocelyn Fine is such a stalwart of this at McGill, where we can have full smiles and lifting up the spirits of those of us who would follow, right? That we have an aging population that is healthy and well. So those are my dreams that I wanted to share with you, and to end with this quote, that as we entered the pandemic, we feared so much because we understood so little. But as in this 2 years, as the science unfolded, as the work of basic scientists morphed into a clinical application in a rapid pace, that we understood far more today, and we understand far more today. And so we fear less. And for that, this is my heroine of all times, Marie Curie. So I want to end there thanking, I have a great staff. This is only a few of them, a wonderfully supportive team at NIDCR. I feel, Tony, if I had to describe it, that I've come home to this position to make a difference and to impact the world in the best way I can. So I thank you for listening to me, and I'm open to any questions you have.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. D'Souza, for this very inspiring and motivating presentation, and for essentially letting us know that Canadians are welcome at the NIDCR. And of course, I see that we have representatives of the CIHR here, the Institute, and maybe we can dream of getting, well, not dream, make it happen and get together and extend some of these initiatives across the boundaries in a fluid manner. It doesn't have to be unidirectional. I think it would be nice if it goes both ways. So listen, I'm not so sure how much time you have, Dr. D'Souza, for questions.
I have a few minutes, absolutely. I would like to.
Well, then we're open for questions, and I will keep my mouth shut and let the others ask the question. So I think that at this point, those that want to ask questions should open their camera, and Rima will open the microphones as well if they've been shut down. And please identify yourself for the benefits of all and for the benefits of Dr. D'Souza, and ask your question. I see a hand up.
Yes, Arlette.
Yes. Hi, Dr. D'Souza. Thank you very much for this extremely inspiring talk. I am a member of the Faculty of Dentistry at the University of Montreal. I work in neuroscience, and I am also heading a center on brain and learning. And I work on mastication myself, so my question is very interested. You know, there are a lot of links now linking decline of mastication to decline of cognitive functions. And I was wondering if you do have interaction with other NIH institute to look into that deeper or to have calls about that, you know, funding opportunities.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Thank you, Arlette. Yes, you know, the National Institutes of Aging is one for sure. And we also are connected to the National Institutes for, well, we have a Center for Behavioral and Social Sciences that we work with closely. And the National Institutes for Arthritis and Musculoskeletal Disease has indicated an interest, but our closest alliance is with, let me name the institutes again, the National Institute of Aging, the National Institute for Neurological Diseases and Stroke, because of the innovation and decline that occurs, and of course, the Center for Behavioral and Social Sciences. Yes, and if you looked at the NIDCR's various programs, and it's all available online on the website, you will find that there is a grant mechanism. I think it was about a year ago, a year and a half, that was in this area, because it's related to the temporomandibular joint as well, right? The muscles of mastication, and it does, I mean, the dysfunction in the muscles of mastication can result in a deregulation of the homeostasis of the joint. But are you thinking broader mastication, or are you thinking?
I'm sorry, I lost part of your response because my internet disconnected, but
I'll send you a chat. I'll send you a chat.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Another question do we have another question?
Alain or Kareem? I'm going to pick names.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. And, you know, I'm in the second box there for some reason. Thanks for the opportunity, Tony, making it happen. And we're privileged to have your input in Canada for sure. But there are more expert oral health researchers on the call, so I'm sure they're dying to get their hands up.
But do talk. I mean, do you have anything particularly interesting you, or?
I guess, and I just, you can hear me okay with, yeah, thank you. It's a good chance to, you know, double down on the commitment. I mean, we have a couple $1 million a year for oral health, as you know, literally, and you have a 500 million. So congratulations on that. So, you know, don't want to pretend to be in the same boat in terms of capacity, but in terms of commitment, we've got the very innovative matching. To your point about social health and determinants and patient-based, the group in Canada that are working on the data in the Canadian Health Measures Survey. So we're measuring, we've got the Canadian HMS, Canadian Health Measures Survey. And the beauty is that we're getting 6,000, you know, the group here on this call have contributed to 6,000 Canadians having their oral health examined by a dentist. And that's novel for us. So it's the first time, it's to your point about having accurate data and data science and being based on evidence. Because before, when I took over, if someone said, Karen, what's the health of oral health of Canadians? I'd say, I don't know, because our last data were in 2007. And then this group have worked very hard with this measures survey, we'll have data on Canadians with some strength, and you know, people can add to that. So I'm very happy about that. That's a $3.3 million investment, you know, by CHR, $2.8 million and more matching from other groups. And we've got a $1 million data analysis grant coming on those data. And I'm confident that other groups will get behind that. So, you know, that's one example. I think in addition to that, we really do want to move into the work with the Lancet Commission, execute on the Lancet Commission's points. And then I will mention Alan Moreau has done a great job as the first director of the Oral Health Network. And then there's we funded another network to compete and to, you know, so we said this is an important area. Network has been done successfully and we need another network. Now, it's not a coronation of that team, it's a grant competition. But again, we prioritised a network when that isn't essential and there wasn't one before my predecessor. So there are a couple of things that we're trying to do, and I'm really open to suggestions and, you know, a group coming saying this is what we want to prioritise in addition to our strategic plan.
So I would like to hear from Elaine and you about whether we can join forces such that we make, so that we represent North America in that commission. Now, our report is part of that commission because in a way we did it, but to come up with what the follow-up should be, what the disease trends are in Canada and how they compare with the US might require a funding mechanism from our side, from the NIDCR side, to bring the two data repositories together for a meaningful set of actions. What do you think of that? I can follow up on that so that we could make it a bigger initiative with a little bit more funding to come up with best practices or disease trends that are significant for our societies.
I'll jump in super quickly before Elaine, to give Elaine a bit more time, perhaps. Thank you so much for that offer. And so obviously, you know, I couldn't be keener to talk to you with partners from this group to try to leverage your experience and wisdom on that. So it's a yes, please. Thank you very much.
I will, yeah.
Yeah, and if I can add, first of all, we would be delighted to work with you, okay, because the Canadian Network for Oral Health, NCOR, is by far the largest national research network in Canada, funded by CHR. We are close now to 1,000 members. We are growing every year, even though our budget is not growing every year. What is the first and I think most important core values is the people that we bring together. So we have different working group on different disease. Sometimes they are also oriented toward more vulnerable populations. So I think we have a lot to work with you, and we can work as of course as a think tank. So, but I like the idea to represent North America and working with you closely. So what I can propose to you is maybe whenever you're available, we can at least organize a virtual meeting with NCOR leaders and members across Canada and show you how we organize, what are the priorities. As Karim mentioned, we recently submitted a new grant for the NCOR 3.0. So we hope that we will be renewed for a next cycle of 5 years. But I think we federate the whole oral health ecosystem across Canada. And I think we are working pretty well together. So with having different stakeholders, including patient representatives. So this is an official invitation. So whenever you are available, and
no, we will. I'm serious about that, and I just wondered if you had a timeline, Elaine, as to when you would, if you're doing studies, assessment studies, because you have a national health system, it should be better than what we have. Do you know what the timeline would be when you would have a fair sense for the status of oral health in Canada?
Oh, this is probably Paul Allison, who is our leaders on that, the community survey.
Sorry.
So Paul, would you like to brief Dr.
Paul
De
is there.
Souza?
Hi, Paul. Paul is such a champion. Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
You.
Hi, Rena. Thanks very much. And so yes, as Karim brought up, there's a group across all of the 10 schools that's been funded to work with Statistics Canada to do the national survey. The survey field work will start at the moment. It's supposed to start in September 22, so in a few months' time. I say at the moment, it's already been put off because of the pandemic, and then now because of the supply of relevant materials for doing the study. So for instance, they've got to find the right test tubes to store biological samples. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but so they're really pushing very hard to start in September, because this isn't just oral health, this is general health, everything. But we have oral health as part of it. So it starts in September. It takes 2 years, the field work, to get the national representative sample.
Yes.
And then the data will be available for analyses approximately a year later. So we would finish in the autumn of 24, and the data would become available in probably the beginning of 26. So getting back to Karim's point and Alain's as well, and thank you very much for opening up that possibility. I think it would be fantastic. And we have in the team already started very preliminary conversations with colleagues in the US around NHANES to look at how we can share data and pool data and optimize both the research and the training opportunities. So it'd be great to engage with you and others at NIDCR about that. So thanks very much.
We will probably bring CDC and HRSA to the table for this discussion, Paul, which I will follow up on. It might take a few months to get it all together, but I was curious as to whether you, in your assessment of general health and oral health being part of that, are you in a position to where you will have combined electronic health records? How far have you progressed in this area?
So you mean within that survey, or do you
even
mean
right
in
now,
general?
In general, do we have
in general health?
combined?
No, I mean, so just as in the States, Canada is divided up into lots of provinces, and the problem with that is that it's different in each province.
Yeah,
there is some progress. At the moment, dental charts for patients are separate to medical charts, but there is now discussion of trying to integrate, and I believe in Quebec that is going to be happening, certainly at some level, and other provinces I can't speak to, but it remains a big problem.
Yes, and it is universally, I think. Yeah, thank you. Well, this is
I see another hand up, Gilles.
Hello, Dr. De Souza. The comment I want to make is there was some announcement about 2 weeks ago from politician here in Canada. And as Paul mentioned, the Central Canada want a dental program across the country. And I would like to hear Paul a little about that also. This is a dream since I was a kid. I was hearing about that, and they want minimal dental care. And I received many calls in the recent days about clinician, but also from journalists. Okay, there is a copy of this in United States? I said, no, not from what I know. And they asked me, do you believe it can be interesting? And I said, as being a scientist, a clinician, and a previous dean, yes, there is interest to have minimal oral health care in this country. So you have any thought on that? And I would like Paul to jump in it if it's possible.
Rena, you want to go first?
Whoops, we lost her.
Looks like. Well, while she, hopefully she'll be back in a minute. So I'll start if you want, Gilles. So the big problem, as was it throughout the media, is it's great that the federal government's saying this, but of course health is in the provinces. So it's the classic Canadian problem. I hope very, very, very much that the provinces can get over that and come up with something. One of the really, really big problems in Canada is we have this horrendous patchwork of programs that help, people with disabilities in this province and the elderly in that province and children in another province. And there's just this horrendous patchwork of programs for specific groups. And it's very difficult for those specific groups in the relevant provinces to understand how to get into that program. And it's very difficult for the dentists to understand who's included and who's not included. And then when the dentists do get access to it and do understand it, they're often not paid anywhere near as much as they would be in the private sector. So I hope, I think you all know me. I really, really want there to be genuine universal coverage. In Quebec, as many of you know, we already have that for children until their 10th birthday. So in Quebec, doing what the federal government wants to do to extend it to they said 12-year-old kids to start off with, and then I think they said the next year later would be 18-year-olds, something like that. I mean, that would be very straightforward if Quebec wanted to play ball with the federal government.
That's
So I don't know about that. We'll see. But I'm always an optimist, and it's great to see. It's a really good step forward anyway that this is happening. Let's put it that way, in my perspective.
Yeah, at least we are talking about oral health, and here the message is for all of us as researcher. We have a role. We will have the CIHR will probably have a role on that, and the Canadian Academy of Health Science, Paul, will have a role. So we need to influence, because people panic now, and some people have big hope. And I receive call. Does that mean I will have orthodontic for aesthetic? Probably no. And scientists, we have a role to identify what are the real minimum or the best. So I hope it will not be a low price, low cost. It will be for general health. And I just want to finish on the cancer also. In Quebec, for cancer, dental care are covered if you have a cancer, but if you have a organ graft, it's not covered. So there is discrepancy, as Paul mentioned. Excuse me.
Listen, I have a feeling that we lost Dr. D'Souza. Okay, so we're having a discussion among ourselves, which I'm pleased, but I think I don't see her name in the list. Rima, is this correct?
No, I don't see her. I'm trying to see if she's coming back, but I don't see anything. No.
Well, listen, I think that the slides kept coming, and every slide that kept coming opened some neurons in my brain and the glia cells that support the neurons, okay, in there. And basically, there's a lot of discussions that needs to be done. It needs to be done in the context of what dental education should be in the future. It needs to be done. What are the areas of priorities? How we want to bring everything together. So there is a lot of opportunity, and hopefully we can locally and well, across Canada, using NCOR and other initiatives, get together and pursue a CDF, for instance. We'll have an opportunity in June, most likely, to go into these discussions as well. So there's a lot of things. I've heard in the presentation of Rena that we need to increase our understanding of events, of diseases, the pathogenesis. I heard the word fundamental research, but I think that at one point we're going to have to, somebody's going to have to say, okay, we want to translate everything, but if we run out of the pipeline of what fundamental science brings us, then even the translational pipeline will dry. So there should be some balance. Sometimes I would like to use the word that some people should have the up front and say, hey, fundamental research is great. Even in the university levels, everybody says it's great, but it's always put in a bigger decoration. And I think that fundamental science probably deserves its own little bouquet, okay, that it would grow. So listen, I don't want to bother you with that. Arlette has a hands up, and go ahead, Arlette.
Well, just regarding this, Antonio, I think that fundamental research is great, of course, because, you know, I'm an advocate of that. But I think that where we have the major gap to fill is how do we organize to translate into clinical research? So we still have very much this weakness of not being able to conduct clinical research, at least in our faculty. And I think this is a major need that we need to address. How can we work to translate fundamental science into clinical research? And maybe we can wrap our head together that the various dental faculty, at least in Montreal, because we're close to each other, or to design. I mean, I don't know how we can do that, but this is something that we really need to look into. And I'm sorry.
Well, it's Rena made it clear that they have a program that allow to bridge the phenomenon with translation and even training the people translation. Perhaps the area is going to look, if we want to, our ability to do research is to take people that are sur le terrain, okay, and that are seeing patients and to train them as well. And that's what some of the programs we're doing in the United States. They take you and come, even just with a DDS, come in, we've got something for you. And I think that's got to be done.
I think either your glia or mine is not working very well because, I mean, you sounded really, really slow. Whoops, I think we lost him too. Did we lose Antonio as well?
Yes,
Antonio was in the submarine.
Well,
Well.
I'm sorry about that. We thank you all for coming, and sorry for short, the strange end of the meeting, but thank you again for everyone for meeting.
Thank you very much, Rima and the team at University of Montreal for setting this up. We really appreciate and for broadening the invitation. Really appreciate the invitation. So thank you very much.
And when Dr. D'Souza, she said that she could probably come end of the summer. We'll send an invitation so we can all meet in person under better non-COVID conditions, hopefully.
All right. Fantastic.
All right,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.